My family wants me to cancel my wedding date so my sister can get married first. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and my fiancé and I have been engaged for about 18 months. We've been together for years, and the plan has always been to get married next spring. We've already booked the venue, paid the deposit for the caterer, and locked in a photographer. All the big stuff is done, so I was starting to feel like we could just relax and enjoy the countdown to our wedding day. But then all hell broke loose to set the stage a little. My family is big and pretty close. We have a lot of traditions, and weddings are a huge deal. My sister, who's 25, just got engaged recently, and while I'm happy for her, she's had a rough time trying to plan her wedding. The main issue is that she's been struggling to book a venue for the date she wants, and that's where the drama starts. She's been pretty vocal about being envious of the venue we booked. Every time she brings it up, she calls it perfect and goes on about how her family can't afford something like that. I didn't think much of it. Lots of people talk about wedding envy when they're planning, right? But I didn't realize how deep her jealousy went until a family dinner a couple of weeks ago. We're all sitting there having a pretty normal meal when my mom starts making this weird speech about how amazing it would be if my sister could use our venue. I'm sitting there, fork halfway to my mouth, thinking it's a joke, but she keeps going. She's talking about how my sister is younger, and since her is in the military, there's a chance he might be deployed soon. According to my mom, it just makes sense for her to get married first. And wouldn't it be so lovely if we moved our wedding date so my sister could have the venue? At this point, I'm still processing, because what my fiancé and I had this date booked for over a year. Everything's paid for, but my mom is dead serious, and my sister is sitting there nodding like it's a done deal. She's furious, and I can't blame her. The whole thing is completely ridiculous. She doesn't even say a word at the table, just gives me a look that says, do not even entertain this idea. So I politely but firmly tell my mom and sister that there's no way we're changing our wedding plans. And of course my sister bursts into tears, full-on waterworks at the dinner table. She storms out, and my mom goes after her, throwing us the most disappointed look I've ever seen. The rest of the dinner is just awkward silence with my parents clearly uncomfortable, but not saying much. I thought maybe that was the end of it. Maybe my sister would cool down, realize how insane the whole idea was, and we could all move on. But nope. The next day my phone is blowing up. Texts, missed calls, voicemails, you name it. It's all from various family members, and the general message is that I need to think about family unity and be the bigger person. My sister must have gotten to them first because everyone is acting like it's some small ask, like all we'd have to do is snap our fingers and the wedding plans would magically change. Some of the messages are trying to guilt trip me into giving in. It's just one small sacrifice for the sake of family harmony, they say, as if moving an entire wedding is no big deal. My mom calls and starts talking about how weddings are supposed to bring families together, not divide them. She's going on and on about how disappointed my grandmother would be if the family couldn't get along for such an important event. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there staring at my phone feeling like I'm living in some kind of weird alternate universe. My fiancé is understandably furious about all of this. She doesn't even want me to entertain these conversations, and I don't blame her. It's our wedding, and we've worked hard to make everything perfect for us. I'm feeling overwhelmed, so I do what any rational person does in the age of the internet. I turn to Reddit. I throw up a post explaining the situation, asking if I'm being unreasonable for refusing to change our wedding date. I'm half expecting people to, yeah, family comes first. You should consider it. But the response is intense. The post blows up. People are furious on my behalf, telling me to stand my ground and not give in to this crazy request. Reddit support is great, but it also makes me realize how ridiculous this whole situation is. My sister even texts me, and either I give up the date or she won't come to the wedding, and she'll make sure the rest of the family doesn't either. I didn't think things could get worse, but now it feels like my whole family is turning against me because I won't let my sister hijack our wedding. At this point, I don't know what to do. I'm trying to stay calm and not let this ruin the excitement of our wedding, but the pressure is getting intense. My fiancé and I are on the same page. We're not changing anything, but with the family piling on, the guilt and my sister basically threatening to blow everything up, it feels like this is just the beginning of a much bigger mess. I woke up the next morning to a phone buzzing nonstop. On my nightstand, half asleep, I reached over, thinking maybe it was work or a random spam call. But no, it was family again. More texts, more missed calls. My grandmother was leading the charge this time, urging me to do the right thing and keep the family together. It was like they'd all gotten the same script overnight. Everyone was suddenly on board with this idea that I should just hand over our wedding date like it was no big deal. The guilt trip was real, and I could feel the pressure building. By mid-morning, I was trying to shake it off, but then my parents showed up at our place unannounced. They looked serious, and I knew this wasn't going to be a casual visit. My fiancé and I let them in, and right away they jumped into this whole spiel about family traditions. My dad was saying how in our family, it's always been customary for the younger sibling to marry first if they're ready. My mom was trying to be more emotional about it, saying how torn up the family is and how she's worried this whole situation is going to cause a permanent rift. It was heavy. My fiancé wasn't having any of it. She stood her ground calmly but firmly, letting them know that we weren't going to move our wedding date. That conversation with my parents was just the beginning. My fiancé and I stood our ground, but the tension kept building. They left our house upset, clearly frustrated that we hadn't given in. I thought that maybe, after venting, things would calm down, but that's not what happened. The next day, I got a message from a cousin saying he was organizing a family dinner that weekend and wanted me to attend. It felt like a trap, but I decided to go. I thought maybe in a calmer environment, we could talk things out reasonably. My fiancée didn't want to go. She was tired of the whole situation, and honestly, I didn't blame her. When I arrived at the dinner, it became immediately clear that it was an ambush. Everyone was there, uncles, cousins, grandparents, and the topic was obvious. Before I even sat down, my mom started talking about how the family always overcomes difficulties and that the sacrifices of today are the foundation for a stronger family tomorrow. My grandmother, who has always been the matriarch of the family, looked me directly in the eye and said, "If you don't give in, Lucas, we will never be the same. You're tearing apart the harmony of our family." The atmosphere was tense, and I knew I was about to be attacked from all sides. As I finally sat down, my sister started speaking. "Lucas, I understand you've planned your wedding, but this is bigger than you. It's our family. I'm not asking for much. I just want the chance to have the wedding I've always dreamed of before my fiancé is deployed. You can get married afterward, right? After all, true love waits." She said this with a smile on her face, like she had already won. My stomach turned. She was manipulating the situation, as if it were my responsibility, not hers, to fix her wedding issues. My blood started boiling, but I stayed calm. I knew that if I lost my temper, it would only make me look like the problem. "We're not changing our date," I said firmly. "Everything is paid for, and we've been committed to this plan for over a year. It's not fair to ask us to throw everything away because of problems that aren't ours." My sister made a face, as if I had said the most heartless thing in the world. Then, to my surprise, she started crying again. But this time it was different. It was a calculated cry, almost performative. She looked around the room as if I had hurt her irreparably. My aunts started shaking their heads in disapproval, like I was the villain. My father, who had been silent up until then, stood up and said, "Lucas, if you go through with this wedding without changing the date, know that we won't be there to support you. You're breaking the family apart with your stubbornness." That was the final straw. I stood up, my heart pounding. "So that's it? You're all willing to emotionally blackmail me into destroying my own wedding plans rather than hold my sister accountable for her own? I'm the oldest, and if you think it's fair to put all this weight on my shoulders, then I'm the only one here who actually cares about what's right." My mom tried to intervene, her voice trembling with emotion. "Lucas, please, you know your grandmother can't handle seeing the family torn apart. If you go through with this, we'll never be the same." I was about to respond when something unexpected happened. My phone started ringing. It was my fiancée. I stepped away from the group and answered. Her voice on the other end was calm but firm. "Lucas, I love you, but if you keep giving space to this manipulation, it's going to tear us apart. We can't get married with this pressure on our backs. Either you put a stop to this, or it's going to destroy us." It was an ultimatum I hadn't expected, but I knew she was right. I went back to the room and, without sitting down, said, You want me to choose between my fiancé and my sister? Then I choose my fiancé. If you can't respect our plans, then you're not welcome at our wedding. And don't think I'm going to change my mind." The room fell silent. My sister wiped away her tears, glaring at me with pure hatred. My mother looked at me like I was a stranger. "So that's it?" she asked in disbelief. "That's it," I replied, already turning to leave. "You're all choosing to support a selfish demand instead of celebrating an important moment in my life. You made the choice." I walked out without looking back, my heart racing, but my head held high. When I got home, my fiancé was waiting, and I knew I had made the right decision, even if it cost me my relationship with my family. The following weeks were hell. I received messages from family members cutting me off from future events, treating me like I was a pariah. My sister made sure to spread the story that I had abandoned the family over a wedding date. Even some childhood friends stopped talking to me, buying into her narrative. But deep down, I knew the only people who truly mattered were standing by my side. My fiancé and I moved forward with our plans, but the emotional scar of this betrayal never fully healed. On our wedding day, my family didn't show up. The seats reserved for them remained empty, but I felt a strange peace. I looked at my wife and knew that I had made the right choice. My family might have tried to tear me down, but I had built my own family now, and nothing, neither jealousy nor manipulation, could take that away from me. After our wedding took place without my family present, I knew things would never be the same. From that moment on, I decided to cut ties. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The emotional manipulation, the lack of support, and the constant pressure made it clear that to move forward with my life alongside my wife, I needed to fully distance myself from that toxicity. Not long after, my sister managed to have her wedding. She finally found a venue available, but the event was a disaster. The catering was poorly organized, her dress ripped before the ceremony, and the atmosphere among the guests was tense. Some people even remarked that the energy of the event fell off, almost like everything had been forced. She tried to keep up appearances, but it was clear to everyone present that it wasn't the dream day she had envisioned. To make matters worse, her marriage didn't last long. Less than a year later, she and her husband separated. The constant fights, the stress of his military job, and family pressure led to everything falling apart. And as expected, I was blamed for it all. My mom, dad, uncles, they all started to say that if I had just given in and changed my wedding date, my sister wouldn't have had so many problems. They claimed that karma was coming back to me for dividing the family. The messages became frequent, and there was constant pressure for me to apologize and try to reconcile. But I was resolute. My wife and I had worked too hard to build our life together, and I had no regrets about the choices I made. We knew our focus was on ourselves, and we were thriving together, working as a team. As time went on, we became financially secure. We started our own business, something we had always dreamed of, and success came with a lot of hard work. Every accomplishment was a reminder that we had made the right decisions by stepping away from the negativity. The peace we found in our life together was non-negotiable, and there was no room for the demands of my old family. However, with our success came another wave of manipulation. The family that once accused me of being selfish started showing up with financial requests. At first, they were small, disguised as loans that, of course, would never be repaid. Then, the messages became more blatant. My dad would call asking for help with household bills. My sister, now divorced, sent messages saying she was struggling and that, as her brother, I had an obligation to help her. Even my mom, who once accused me of destroying the family, claimed I needed to make up for the damage I caused by offering financial support. They acted as if I owed them something for not giving in to their demands in the past. But I didn't cave. After everything I had been through, it was clear that these people were not interested in my well-being, only in what they could get from me. They saw me as nothing more than a resource, a solution to the problems they had created themselves. They were no longer my family. They were just people related to me by blood. And blood alone isn't enough to sustain a real relationship. My real family was my wife, the one who stood by me through every moment, every battle, and every victory. That's when I made my final decision. I blocked all their contacts, deleted the messages, and completely cut off any ties with them. There was no longer any space for these people in my life. I had built a new reality with my wife, a reality where respect, mutual support, and love were the only foundations. There was no more manipulation, no more guilt, no more pressure. I didn't owe them anything. If they couldn't respect my decision, then they didn't deserve to be a part of my life. Now my wife and I live in peace, focused on what truly matters, ourselves. What I have with her is a true partnership, a family I chose to build and protect. The others, they are just echoes of a past I left behind. And honestly, I don't miss any of it. My girlfriend took my sports car without permission and met up with her ex to drive it. They crashed it, and now my girlfriend is begging me not to press charges. My girlfriend and I have been together for about a year now. She stays over a lot and even has a key, but doesn't live with me yet, and I plan to ask her to move in later this month. Our relationship has a lot of open communication, which I love, and our biggest problem is her relationship with her ex. She told me he was a manipulator and mentally abusive, so they broke up. Yet she still insists on keeping contact with him and calls him a friend. Recently, I got a call in the middle of the night from a hospital saying my girlfriend had been in a car crash. I was confused for a moment as she doesn't own a car, and the only one she drove was my day car, and she hadn't asked to borrow. I thought about who she would have been with if she wasn't driving as I rushed down to the hospital. When I got to her room, she was unconscious and saw there was a nurse and cop beside her. I came over and asked if she was okay and what had happened. The cop asked who I was, and I told him I was her boyfriend. The nurse gave me the rundown that she had a few broken bones but no surgery needed, and she was only asleep because of the pain medication. The cop asked for my name, and when I told him, he paused and asked if I owned a 2022 Camaro. When I told him yes, he said that some officers had already been dispatched to find me as it was my car that had been in the accident. He asked if I let my girlfriend or friend borrow my car, and I told him no. I don't let anyone drive that car. It's my prized possession and something my late father and I had worked on together. It's a relic, and I have barely put any miles on it since my father died. I told the cop my car should be locked up in my garage, and no one has access to it except for me. The cop asked if I was sure, so I pulled up the camera I have in my garage and saw it wasn't there. That's when I started panicking. I told him it was gone, and that's when he said, "So then Ms. Dalton or Mr. Garrison stole it from you." Then I told him I didn't know why my girlfriend would take it, and I sure as hell didn't know anyone with the last name Garrison. Who? I asked if he had a picture, and when he showed me a photo of the guy's license, my stomach dropped. He was my girlfriend's ex-boyfriend. I told him as much, and he just gave me a pity look. He informed me that there was a car meetup, and my car had been used in a drag race by my girlfriend and her ex. Only her ex lost control of the car and wrapped it around a power line. I was furious and asked if my car was okay. He told me it was totaled. I just crouched down and struggled to breathe. My girlfriend knew how important that car was to me, and she F.I.N.G. stole it and let her ex drive it in a damn drag race. I was beyond pissed. The cop told me to calm down before I did something I would regret. I asked if the ex was here in the hospital, and he told me he wasn't going to let me leave the room until I had calmed down. After about 5 minutes of taking deep breaths, he asked if I wanted to press charges. I looked right at my girlfriend's sleeping body and, without hesitation, told him yes. I pulled up the security footage on my phone and went back a few hours where we watched as my girlfriend let herself into my house with her spare key, used my keys to unlock the garage from the inside, and opened the garage door. She grabbed the keys to my Camaro and drove off. I almost threw my phone against the wall. The cop gave me his email address and asked me to send the footage to him, and he would get an arrest warrant for my girlfriend. But my girlfriend would have to rat out her ex in order for him to get charged. I told him I had a camera inside the car, and if it was recovered from the crash, it might have footage of them. He said he would look into it, then just stared at me. He asked if I was going to stay here for a bit longer, and when I said yes, he asked if I was going to do anything stupid, and I told him no. I just wanted to make sure my girlfriend was all right and woke up okay. Then I planned to leave. He told me he'd be putting someone at the door to the ex's room, so I'd better not go looking. I just went and sat down near my girlfriend's bed. I think I sat with my head in between my legs for like an hour before she woke up. Even her damn breathing bothered me at that moment. She was all smiles and seemed so happy to see me until I dropped the hammer and asked why the hell she thought it would be okay to take my car for a joyride. She started stuttering and said she didn't mean any harm and it was supposed to be a surprise where she had a friend get it all cleaned up for me. Only some idiot driver cut in front of her and she crashed the car. She apologized and said that luckily she was okay and that's all that should matter. I asked if she was in the car alone and she straight up lied to my face saying yeah, of course. I just nodded my head and told her I was going to go get her nurse on my way out. I told her she didn't need to worry that her ex was okay too and was in a room nearby recovering. Her face fell and I just left. Ever since then, she sent me multiple texts a day apologizing, saying it wasn't what it looked like. I got a lawyer and told him I wanted to sue both of them for the cost of my car. Theft, breaking and entering, the whole works. When he had the papers delivered, that's when the phone call started. She left voicemails of her crying and saying she didn't want to go to jail, then rude messages where she said she never loved me in the first place, and that's why she was glad she got back with her ex. Those messages stung a lot as I knew by now she was obviously cheating on me with him. But hearing her admit it was tough. She eventually got all her family to start calling me and telling me I had no right to do this, and it was one simple mistake and I shouldn't ruin her life over it. I just ignored everyone. I told my lawyer I wanted to get every penny we could out of them, and I found out from the cop later that they had found my dashcam footage with proof they both knew it was a stolen car. So I knew we had a very good case. I can't wait until court is over and I can move on with my life. As I watched the case unfold, I could feel the weight of everything that was happening. I was trying to understand how someone who had been by my side for so long could betray me so thoroughly. It felt like a scene from a movie, but the reality was harsher. I was about to face something I never thought I'd have to, fighting against someone I genuinely thought I loved. The first hearing was set, and until then, her messages continued nonstop. She alternated between pleas and insults, as if she had no control over her own emotions. One day, she was saying it was all a mistake and she needed me by her side. The next, she was telling me that she always thought I was weak and that her ex was everything I could never be. It was as if I were just another pawn in her twisted plan to escape the consequences. She really thought she could manipulate me with this "I love you and I hate you" routine. Finally, the day arrived, and I walked into that courtroom, trying to hold back the anger that was still simmering inside me. She was there, on the other side, with her lawyer, who was trying to argue that it was all just an innocent prank that ended in an unfortunate accident. He described the theft of my car as if it were some harmless mischief, something trivial. I could feel my anger building again, but I stayed composed, focused. I knew that's exactly what she wanted, for me to lose control so that I'd look like the villain here. When the judge asked me to explain what that car meant to me, I took a deep breath and let the words pour out. I explained every detail, from how my dad and I worked on it together to the priceless emotional value it held for me. I told him it wasn't just a vehicle, it was a connection to the person I loved most who was no longer here. She looked at me, and for a moment, I thought she might show some remorse, some regret. But then she looked away, expressionless. When it was her turn to speak, she played the victim card. She tried to convince the judge that she only wanted to do something nice for me, that it was all a misunderstanding, and that the accident was caused by a reckless driver no one saw. Her lawyer, who seemed to have prepared every detail, tried to paint a picture of her as almost a hero, a well-meaning person who just made an impulsive decision. But to me, it was just a pathetic spectacle, an attempt to manipulate not only the judge but everyone in that room, as if she could somehow erase everything. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. The security footage was shown, both from my house and from inside the car. As the videos began to play, the room went silent. There she was sneaking into my house, taking the keys like it was the most natural thing in the world. Then the scene shifted to her and her ex getting ready for the race, the excitement in their eyes, the carefree way they were acting. It looked nothing like an unfortunate accident. It was pure selfishness and recklessness on display. I looked over at her, and for the first time, I saw her lose her composure. She shrank, realizing her mask had finally slipped. Her lawyer tried to object, but the judge allowed the footage to play all the way through. When it was over, the judge looked at her with a serious expression, clearly disappointed. I knew, in that moment, that any attempt she had at playing the victim had just shattered. The truth was there for everyone to see, and no pretty words or fake tears could undo what the footage showed. She looked down, finally realizing she couldn't escape this. The judge set a new hearing to decide on the sentence, and I left the room feeling a different kind of weight. The revenge wouldn't bring back my car, and it certainly wouldn't restore the memory it represented. But there was something comforting in knowing she'd finally face the consequences of her actions. In the days that followed, her messages grew more desperate. She accused me of being cruel, said I was ruining her life, that I was making her pay too high a price for a simple mistake. In her mind, I was the villain, someone she could manipulate. I started blocking the calls, but the messages kept coming, each one like a scratch on my resolve, trying to make me cave. But now, none of it moved me. At the final hearing, the judge made the ruling. She was ordered to pay restitution for the damages, and her ex was also held liable for his part in the theft and destruction of the car. They were both charged with trespassing and theft, with no chance to argue it was an innocent mistake after all that the footage showed. Hearing the sentence lifted a weight off my shoulders. She tried one last time to look at me, maybe a final attempt to appeal to me, but all I felt was disgust. She meant nothing to me anymore. As I walked out of the courtroom, I knew I'd never see her the same way again. She hadn't just destroyed a car. She destroyed trust, respect, and any remnants of love that had once been there. That night, she sent me one last message, saying she hoped I'd be happy with my revenge. I deleted it without replying because the only thing I really wanted now was to move on and never hear her name again. I may have lost the car, but I gained something far more important. The freedom to move forward without someone so dishonest by my side. Someone who only thought about herself. The days following the trial were almost unbearably silent. Her messages had stopped, but her family's chatter never did. They called, sent texts, and even showed up at my door. Each one of them wanted to defend that poor girl, claiming that I was overreacting, that her life shouldn't be ruined over one mistake. In other circumstances, maybe I would have felt some weight or compassion, but at that moment, the coldness inside me was unmatched. For weeks, I kept my distance from everyone and focused solely on myself. After all, I had suffered a loss too. That car, beyond its material value, was my final connection to my father. We had worked on it together, and every part of it told a story of us. Losing the car and being betrayed by someone I trusted felt like reliving a goodbye. The pain cut deep, but I couldn't allow myself to be brought down. I decided to rebuild, but not before making sure she would pay for every single thing she had done to me. That's when the idea for my ultimate revenge started to take shape. The compensation covered part of the value, but I wanted her to feel every bit of the damage she'd caused. I used some of the money from the compensation to hire a private investigator. I knew she wouldn't be able to stay quiet. Someone like her always wanted more, and deep down, I wanted to see how far her lies went. It didn't take long to find out that, even after the trial, she was still meeting with her ex, as if nothing had happened. The audacity was almost impressive. Discovering these meetings only strengthened my resolve. I needed to do more. One of the investigators' visits led to a suggestion that I make something public, something that wouldn't just affect her, but also her ex and anyone else who was around. A kind of event that would make it clear to everyone exactly what kind of person she really was. That's when the idea of exposing everything hit me. I planned each detail like a meticulous event. A few weeks later, I arranged a small gathering for all our mutual acquaintances, her friends, work colleagues, and even distant relatives. I told everyone that I wanted to make an announcement about my recovery and close the chapter with her. Of course, she was invited, though I'm sure she was suspicious. On the night of the event, everything was set. She arrived with some friends, trying to maintain the appearance that nothing had happened, as though the entire incident was just a thing of the past. I greeted her with a fake smile, and she returned it, but there was a look in her eyes, curious, maybe even fearful. She had no idea what was coming. I waited for the right moment to step onto the makeshift stage and grab the microphone. The room fell silent. and I began to tell the story of the car, the betrayal, and the trial, but without directly mentioning her name. With each detail I revealed, I could see her face changing color. She tried to hide in the crowd, but it was impossible. I had set everything up so that by the end, no one would have any doubt who the protagonist of this story really was. The climax of the night came when I revealed that I had proof she and her ex were still together. No one expected it, and I showed some photos from the investigations, the messages of apologies and insults she had sent me, even the exchange of texts between her and the ex discussing the race that wrecked my car. She tried to leave the room, but I had someone at the door to make sure no one could escape before the end. Her ex, who hadn't been invited, found out about the event and showed up just in time to see his reputation get dragged through the mud alongside hers. After exposing everything, I made sure to thank everyone for coming and informed them that the recording of the event would be sent to anyone who couldn't attend. The reaction was overwhelming. She screamed, called everyone hypocrites, and tried to defend herself, but no one was willing to listen. They had seen the truth, raw and unfiltered. The ex, seeing the damage, tried to drag her out, but the crowd united against both of them and started booing. In the days that followed, she lost her job, friends cut ties, and her family, tired of the lies, began to distance themselves. I knew this public humiliation was something she would never forget. She tried to reach out to me, sending messages where she called me a monster and said I ruined her life. But at last, the feeling of justice prevailed, and I ignored every word. For the first time, I felt like the revenge had been complete. One day, however, when I least expected it, I received one last message from her. She said she was leaving the city, that I had made her lose everything, and that she never wanted to hear my name again. It was then that I felt the true closure I had been searching for. She was out of my life forever. The revenge brought a certain relief, and with time, I started focusing on my own things, no longer looking back. I returned to working on cars, something I had put aside after everything that had happened. I restarted, made new friends, and slowly built a life free from the shadows of the past. I could finally breathe in peace. And as for her, I don't know, and honestly, I don't care. That chapter of my life is closed, locked, and buried. The future was finally clear, and I could move forward, no longer carrying the weight of a betrayal that nearly destroyed who I was.
My husband abandoned me while I was pregnant, by text. 9 years later, he broke into my backyard to kidnap our son. Before we get into the story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story, and drop a like on the video to support us. I'm Maya, I'm 33 years old, and I work night shifts in the emergency room as a nursing tech. What I'm about to tell you happened 3 years ago, but I still remember every single detail like it was yesterday. This is going to be long, so stick with me. Also, just so we're clear, yes, I went through hell, and yes, I came out the other side, but not without some serious battle scars. It started the night I told my husband I was pregnant. We'd been married for 4 years at that point, and honestly, things weren't great, but they weren't terrible either. He drove for one of those rideshare apps, working crazy hours just like me. We were living paycheck to paycheck in a small apartment, but we were managing, or so I thought. I took the test after my shift, hands shaking the entire time. 2 lines. I stared at it for what felt like an hour, but was probably more like 5 minutes. I was terrified and excited all at once. We'd talked about kids before in that vague, someday kind of way, but this was real. This was happening. When he got home that evening, I showed him the test. I'll never forget the look on his face. He smiled, said all the right things about how happy he was, pulled me into a hug. But something was off. His body was tense, and when he pulled back, his eyes looked almost panicked. I told myself I was imagining it, that he was just shocked like I was. Then he started talking about money. The credit cards were maxed out, he said. We had bills piling up that I didn't even know about. How were we going to afford a baby? I tried to calm him down, told him we'd figure it out together like we always did, but he just kept pacing around our tiny living room, running his hands through his hair, muttering about debt and expenses. 3 days later, he kissed me goodbye before his shift and said he was going to drive in the next city over for the weekend. Better fares, he claimed. More money. He'd come back Sunday night with enough to help us catch up on everything. I believed him because why wouldn't I? He was my husband, the father of my child. His texts got less and less frequent. Saturday morning, I got one message. Saturday evening, nothing. I tried calling, but it went straight to voicemail. By Sunday, I was worried sick, texting him every few hours asking if he was okay. Radio silence. Then at 2 a.m. on Monday, my phone lit up. One text. Just 7 words that destroyed everything. I need some time for myself. Before I could even respond, before I could call him, before I could do anything, he blocked me, blocked my number, blocked me on every social media platform, blocked my email. Gone. Vanished. Like I meant nothing. I sat on our bathroom floor holding that positive pregnancy test, crying so hard I thought I might throw up. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I went through my shift at the hospital on autopilot, completely numb. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. People don't just disappear like that. Husbands don't abandon their pregnant wives through a text message at 2 a.m. But mine did. 2 weeks later, a delivery guy showed up at my door with an envelope. Divorce papers. He'd actually filed for divorce. I stood there in my scrubs, just off a 12-hour shift, holding legal documents that officially ended my marriage. There was no note, no explanation, nothing. Just papers to sign. I found out through mutual friends what had really happened. He'd met some young woman as a passenger, started talking to her, and apparently decided she was a better option than his pregnant wife and their struggling life together. He'd moved in with her. Just like that. Threw away 4 years of marriage for someone he'd known for what? A few weeks? Maybe a month? I took off the cheap pendant necklace he'd given me on our first anniversary. I stared at it for a long time, this stupid little silver heart that probably cost him $20. Then I ripped it off so hard the chain snapped. I threw it in the trash and didn't look back. If he could throw me away that easily, I could throw away every reminder of him just as fast. That was the moment I decided I was done crying, done waiting for him to come back, done hoping this was all some horrible mistake. He'd made his choice, and now I had to make mine. I was going to have this baby, and I was going to do it alone. I didn't need him. I didn't need anyone who could walk away that easily, but I had no idea how hard it was actually going to be. The first person who noticed something was wrong was my coworker. Her name doesn't matter, but she'd been working emergency room nights for almost 20 years. She'd seen everything, knew how to read people, and could spot trouble from across a crowded waiting area. One night during our shift, she pulled me aside in the break room. She didn't ask invasive questions or pry into my business. She just said she'd noticed I seemed different lately, and if I ever needed to talk, she was there. No judgment. I broke down right there, told her everything. The pregnancy, the abandonment, the divorce papers. She hugged me while I cried, then looked me straight in the eye and said the best thing anyone could have said at that moment. "You're going to get through this, and that baby is lucky to have you." I started writing in a cheap spiral notebook I bought at the pharmacy. Every night after my shift, I'd sit at my kitchen table and write to my baby. Promises, mostly. Promises that I'd protect them, love them, give them everything I possibly could. Promises that they'd never feel unwanted or abandoned the way I felt. It sounds silly, maybe, but writing those letters kept me sane during those early months. My first prenatal appointment was at a community clinic because that was all I could afford. The waiting room was packed with other women, some with partners, some with their mothers, some alone like me. I sat there watching couples hold hands and talk excitedly about their upcoming babies, and I felt so incredibly isolated. This should have been a moment I shared with someone. Instead, I was surrounded by people and completely alone. But then they called my name, took me back to the exam room, and I heard my baby's heartbeat for the first time. Everything else just faded away. That rapid flutter through the monitor, that proof of life growing inside me, it made everything real in a way the positive test never had. I left that clinic with printed ultrasound images and a determination I hadn't felt in weeks. I could do this, we could do this. Then his mother called. I should have known she would eventually. She'd always been pleasant enough to me, in that surface-level way where you know someone doesn't really like you but maintains basic courtesy. Now she didn't even bother with that. She told me her son was confused and going through something. She suggested I think carefully about my choices moving forward. Like I had a choice. Like I'd gotten pregnant by myself. I asked her if she knew where he was. She said yes, but wouldn't tell me. I asked if she'd talked to him about the baby. She said it wasn't her place to get involved in our problems. But here she was, calling me, telling me to consider what I was going to do. The hypocrisy was stunning. I told her very calmly that her son had abandoned his pregnant wife and filed for divorce. That he'd blocked all contact and moved in with another woman. That if he was so confused, maybe he should have thought about that before running away like a coward. She started to argue, but I just hung up. My hands were shaking so badly I had to put the phone down. I touched my stomach, feeling the small curve that was just starting to show, and made a decision right then. I was done waiting for him to step up, done hoping he'd somehow develop a conscience. I was moving forward alone, and I wasn't going to waste any more energy on someone who'd made it crystal clear I meant nothing to him. That night, I wrote another letter in my notebook. This one was different from the others. This one was a promise that I would be everything this baby needed. Mother and father if I had to be. Provider, protector, everything. They wouldn't grow up wondering why their father left or feeling like they weren't good enough. I'd make sure they knew they were loved and wanted, even if it was just by me. My coworker noticed the change in me during our next shift together. Said I seemed stronger somehow, more focused. I told her I'd decided to stop hoping he'd come back and start planning for the reality I was actually living in. She squeezed my shoulder and told me she was proud of me. It was such a small thing, but it meant everything. I started making real plans, figured out my maternity leave, calculated what I'd get in disability payments, started looking at cheaper apartments. The numbers weren't great, but they were manageable if I was careful. I called my parents for the first time since everything happened. They lived 3 states away and we weren't super close, but they were shocked and angry when I told them what happened. My mom cried. My dad said some choice words about my husband that I won't repeat but fully agreed with. At night, alone in the apartment I'd soon have to leave because I couldn't afford it by myself, I'd read through all the letters I'd written, dozens of them by now, promises and hopes and plans. This baby was real, growing every day, and would be here before I knew it. Ready or not, I was going to be a mother. And I was going to do it without him. Labor started 2 days before my due date, at 3 in the morning naturally, because nothing about this experience was going to be convenient. I called my coworker first, then my parents, who immediately started the long drive from their state. The contractions were getting closer together fast, and I knew I didn't have much time. My coworker picked me up and drove me to the hospital where we both worked. It was surreal being wheeled through the emergency room entrance as a patient instead of staff. My colleagues were amazing, though, making sure I got into a room quickly, keeping me calm between contractions. My coworker held my hand through the whole thing, coaching me through breathing, wiping my forehead, being the support person I should have had but didn't. My parents arrived just an hour before I delivered. My mom rushed into the room looking terrified, my dad right behind her. They'd driven through the night without stopping. Seeing them there, seeing how much they cared despite the distance that had grown between us over the years, made me cry almost as much as the contractions did. My son was born at 11:47 in the morning on a Tuesday. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. Perfect in every way. They placed him on my chest and I looked down at his tiny face, his eyes squinting against the light, and felt a love so intense it was almost painful. This was my baby, mine, and no one could take that away from me. When they asked about the father's name for the birth certificate, I said no, just mine. My last name only. The nurse looked uncomfortable, but wrote down what I told her. My son would have my name, would be mine alone legally, and every other way. His father had given up any right to be on that certificate when he walked away. My parents stayed for a week, helping me figure out how to keep a tiny human alive when I was running on no sleep and hormones. My coworker visited every other day, bringing food and supplies and her steady presence that kept me grounded. I'd moved to a smaller apartment before the birth, something I could actually afford, and slowly we made it feel like home. But the peace didn't last long. I met with a legal aid attorney 2 weeks after giving birth. She was kind but direct. I needed to file for child support. And to do that, I'd need to legally establish paternity. Even though I knew he was the father, even though we'd been married when I got pregnant, because I'd filed divorce papers that were still being processed, I'd have to force him to acknowledge his son. She explained the process would be long and frustrating. We'd have to locate him first, serve him papers, demand a paternity test, go through court hearings, and he could fight it every step of the way. Based on his behavior so far, he probably would. But I needed to do this. I needed that child support not just for the money, although that was important, but because he didn't get to just pretend his son didn't exist. Finding him to serve the papers was its own nightmare. He'd moved at least twice since leaving me, both times with that woman he'd run off with. The process server went to 3 different addresses before finally catching him. And of course, he refused service the first time, actually running away from the person trying to hand him legal documents. Like a child. A coward. It took 3 months to get him into court for the paternity test. 3 months of delays and rescheduled dates, and his lawyer asking for extensions. When he finally showed up, he looked different. Thinner. Tired. He wouldn't make eye contact with me. His lawyer tried to claim there was doubt about paternity, which made me so angry I thought I might explode right there in the courtroom. We'd been married. I'd never been with anyone else. But this was the game we had to play. The DNA test was quick at least. Swabs for him, swabs for my son, and then we waited. Those 2 weeks were agonizing. I knew what the result would be, obviously, but some tiny part of me worried. What if something went wrong? What if they messed up the samples? What if somehow this didn't work and I couldn't make him pay for what he'd done? During those impossibly hard first months, my elderly neighbor became a lifesaver. She'd knock on my door at least twice a week with containers of homemade food. Soup, casseroles, things I could easily reheat one-handed while holding a crying baby. She'd offer to hold my son while I took a shower or nap, just sitting in my living room rocking him gently. I cried the first time she did it, overwhelmed by this unexpected kindness from someone who barely knew me. The DNA results came back exactly as expected. 99.9% probability of paternity. He was legally, officially, undeniably the father. His lawyer looked disappointed. He looked sick, and I felt nothing but grim satisfaction. Now came the real fight for child support, and everything else he owed his son. The final court date came 8 months after I'd first filed the paternity suit. 8 months of legal back and forth, of him trying every possible delay tactic, of me drowning in paperwork and court dates while caring for an infant. My son was almost a year old by the time the judge made the final ruling. Child support was ordered, retroactive to his birth. The judge wasn't sympathetic to the excuses his lawyer tried to make about financial hardship. "You abandoned your pregnant wife," the judge said, looking at him with obvious disgust. "You have responsibilities whether you want them or not." The amount wasn't huge, but it was something. More importantly, he'd have to pay back everything from the past 8 months in one payment. That retroactive payment hit my account 2 weeks later. I stared at my phone, at the balance that had jumped by some $1,000, and felt like I could finally breathe for the first time in over a year. This money meant security. It meant I could afford things my son needed without choosing between his diapers and my groceries. I used part of it as a deposit on a small house rental. Nothing fancy, but it had a backyard with a covered porch. I bought a hammock at a discount store. Bright colors, cheerful. I hung it on the porch, and that first evening, I sat in it with my son on my lap, gently swaying back and forth, watching the sunset. He laughed, this pure, joyful sound, and I thought maybe we were going to be okay after all. Around the time my son turned 2, I got offered a better position. A clinic in a decent neighborhood needed a tech for regular daytime hours. Better pay, normal schedule, no more overnight shifts that left me exhausted and barely able to function. I took it immediately. Having weekends off, being home at night, it felt like winning the lottery. The new schedule meant I could actually have a life outside of work and caring for my son. On my days off, when the weather was nice, we'd spend time in that hammock together. I'd read to him, or we'd just rock back and forth watching clouds. Those moments were everything to me. Just the two of us, peaceful and content. He started asking about his father around that time. Not in any detailed way. He was only 2, but he'd see other kids at daycare with their dads and notice the absence. The first time he asked where his daddy was, my heart broke a little. I'd been preparing for this question, but it still hit hard. I told him the truth in the simplest way I could. Some people don't know how to stay, but we know how to stay, you and me. We're a team, and we're going to be just fine. He seemed satisfied with that answer, at least for now. I knew the questions would get harder as he got older, but I'd deal with that when it came. My coworker from the hospital and my elderly neighbor became like family. They came over for dinners, celebrated my son's birthday with us, sent cards and small gifts for no reason. These women who owed me nothing had become my support system, my chosen family. I was so grateful for them I could hardly express it. The monthly child support payments were inconsistent at best. Some months they'd come through on time. Other months they'd be weeks late. Sometimes they'd be the full amount, sometimes partial. It was frustrating, but I'd learned to plan around it, to assume it wouldn't come and be pleasantly surprised when it did. I'd stopped expecting anything reliable from him long ago. I'd heard through mutual friends that he and that woman had broken up, that he was living alone now, working odd jobs, barely making ends meet. A small petty part of me felt satisfaction at that, though I tried not to dwell on it. Karma wasn't my responsibility. My responsibility was the little boy who called me mama and depended on me for everything. We developed our routines and rituals. Saturday mornings were pancakes and cartoons. Sunday afternoons were playground time if the weather was good. Every night before bed, I'd read him 3 stories, always 3. Never more or less because consistency mattered to him. These small moments built our life together, created our own little family unit of two. I still wrote in that notebook sometimes, though less frequently now. The letters had changed from desperate promises to updates on our life. Look how strong we are. I'd write, look how far we've come. Your father's loss. Truly. He was missing everything. Every milestone, every smile, every breakthrough. His choice. His loss. On the anniversary of the day he'd left, I took off my wedding ring that I'd somehow still been wearing out of habit. I'd lost weight since having my son, and it had been sliding around on my finger for months anyway. I put it in a drawer and didn't think about it again. That chapter was closed. This new chapter, with just me and my son, this was what mattered now. The daycare my son went to held parent meetings every few months. Usually I dreaded them because it meant awkward small talk with other parents who had partners and support systems and lives that looked nothing like mine. But this particular meeting changed everything, though I didn't know it at the time. I was sitting in one of those tiny chairs meant for children, trying to pay attention to the director talking about upcoming curriculum changes, when a man sat down next to me in an equally tiny chair. He had a tired face, the kind that comes from working too many hours and sleeping too few. He gave me a small smile and turned his attention to the front of the room. Later, I learned he was a physical education teacher at 2 different public schools. He taught elementary school kids during the day and coached after-school sports programs to make ends meet. His daughter was in my son's class, and like me, he was doing the single-parent thing after a divorce. We didn't talk much that first meeting, just a brief introduction, and then we both left to pick up our kids. But our kids became friends almost immediately. They'd seek each other out at drop-off, play together during the day, and ask about each other at home. So naturally, we started running into each other more often. The playground near my house became a regular after-daycare spot, and more often than not, he'd show up with his daughter around the same time. The conversations started simple, kid stuff mostly, comparing notes on tantrums and sleep schedules and the absolute chaos of raising small humans alone, but gradually they deepened. We talked about our divorces, the loneliness of single parenting, the exhaustion that never quite went away. He actually listened when I talked, didn't just wait for his turn to speak. It was refreshing. I found myself looking forward to these playground meetings, started making sure my son and I were there at times I knew they'd probably show up. Noticed when my stomach did a little flip when I'd see them walking toward us. I tried to ignore it at first. Told myself I was just happy my son had a friend, but I knew I was lying to myself. He never pushed anything or made things weird, never crossed boundaries or made me uncomfortable. He seemed to understand instinctively that I came with a whole complicated past, and a son who would always be my first priority. That understanding meant more to me than I could express. So many men would have run the other direction, but he just accepted it as reality and stayed anyway. One afternoon, my son came down with a high fever. It was one of those sudden things where he was fine at breakfast and burning up by lunch. I'd left work early, given him medicine, and was sitting on the couch with him watching a movie when there was a knock at my door. It was him, with more medicine and a new kids' movie still in the wrapper. He'd heard through the daycare that my son was sick and thought these might help. He didn't stay long, didn't try to come in and play hero. Just handed them over with a gentle smile and told me to let him know if I needed anything. Such a small gesture, but I sat there after he left feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Cared for, thought about, like I mattered to someone. A few weeks later, the kitchen faucet started dripping. Not a major problem, but constant and annoying, and of course happening when I had no money to call a plumber. I mentioned it in passing during one of our playground conversations, not asking for help, just venting about how there was always something breaking. He showed up the next day with tools and fixed it in about 20 minutes. I tried to pay him, but he refused. Said friends help each other out. That's what they do. Friends. The word hung in the air between us, loaded with possibility. We were friends, genuinely. But I was starting to want more than that. And from the way he looked at me sometimes, I thought maybe he did too. 7 months after that first parent meeting, we'd fallen into such a comfortable pattern that it felt like we'd known each other for years. The kids were inseparable. We had standing playground dates 3 times a week. He'd text me funny things that happened at school. I'd send him pictures when my son did something particularly adorable. It felt natural and easy and right. One evening, after the kids had been playing for hours and the sun was starting to set, they both started begging to have a sleepover. They'd been asking for weeks, but we'd always put them off. Now they tag-teamed us with the kind of united front only small children can manage. We looked at each other, had an entire conversation with just our eyes, and agreed. That night, after the kids finally fell asleep in my son's room, we sat on my porch in the hammock together. Not touching, careful of boundaries, but close. We talked about everything and nothing, about our pasts and futures and what we wanted from life. When he finally left around midnight, he paused at the door and asked if maybe, possibly if I was interested, as we could go on an actual date sometime, just the two of us. I said yes before I could overthink it. And when I went to bed that night, I wrote in my notebook for the first time in months. But this time, instead of promises or updates, I wrote about hope. About the possibility of a future that wasn't just me and my son against the world. About maybe, just maybe, letting someone else in. Our first real date was nothing fancy. We went to a pizza place near my house after both kids were with babysitters. I was so nervous I could barely eat at first, but he made me laugh within the first 5 minutes and everything relaxed. We talked for 3 hours straight, barely noticing when the restaurant started closing around us. When he walked me to my door that night, he didn't try to kiss me, just squeezed my hand and said he couldn't wait to do it again. We took things slow, deliberately and carefully. After everything I'd been through, rushing into anything felt dangerous. He understood that without me having to explain it constantly. He'd been burned in his divorce too, knew what it felt like to have trust shattered. So we built something solid, one small brick at a time. The kids were thrilled when we told them we were dating. They'd apparently been discussing it between themselves and had decided it was a good idea, which made us both laugh. They started calling our time together family time, completely unprompted, which made my heart squeeze every time I heard it. What I loved most was how he showed up for the small things. When my car wouldn't start one morning, and I was panicking about getting my son to daycare and myself to work, he was there within 15 minutes to drive us. When I mentioned needing to pick up groceries but dreading taking a tired toddler shopping, he offered to watch my son without hesitation. He never made a big production of helping. Just did it because that's what partners do. The first time I really knew I loved him was such a mundane moment it almost seemed silly. We were making dinner together, something we'd started doing on Friday nights with both kids. He was teaching my son how to knead pizza dough while his daughter set the table. I was chopping vegetables and just watching them, watching my son laugh at something he said, watching him be patient and kind and present. That's when it hit me. This was what I'd needed all along. Someone who understood that my son and I were a package deal, who didn't just tolerate that but embraced it. About 5 months into dating officially, my son got sick in the middle of the night. Nothing serious, just a stomach bug, but it was rough. I was doing laundry at 2 a.m, trying to comfort a crying child, completely exhausted. My phone buzzed with a text from him asking if we were okay, that he'd heard my son crying through the walls. We lived in different apartments, but apparently the walls were thin enough he could hear us. 20 minutes later, he was at my door with cleaning supplies and crackers and that medicine that helps with nausea. He helped me clean up, held my son while I changed the sheets again, and stayed until dawn when everything had calmed down. He didn't complain once, didn't act like it was some huge burden. He just helped because that's what you do for people you love. I told him I loved him that morning, both of us exhausted and probably smelling terrible, sitting on my couch while the kids finally slept. He said it back immediately, like he'd just been waiting for me to say it first. We sat there for a while, just existing together in that moment, and I felt more peaceful than I had in years. The relationship progressed naturally from there. He started staying over more often. His daughter brought toys to keep at my place. My son started calling him by his first name instead of just her dad, which felt significant. We became a unit, this makeshift family of 4 that somehow worked perfectly. 7 months in, we were basically living together even though we technically still had separate places. It made financial sense to combine households officially. But more than that, it made emotional sense. The kids were desperate for it. We wanted it. So we started looking for a bigger place that could fit all of us comfortably. One night, after we just signed the lease on a 3-bedroom house with a real yard, we were sitting in my hammock together. The one I'd bought with that first child support payment, the one that had become my symbol of survival and independence. He asked if we could take it with us to the new place. Said it seemed important, that it was part of my story, and should come along. Such a small thing to notice, but it made me cry. He got it. He understood that these pieces of my past, even the hard parts, had made me who I was. He wasn't trying to erase what I'd been through or pretend it didn't happen. He was just offering to be part of what came next. I wrote in my notebook that night while he slept next to me. I wrote about second chances and healing and how sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead us exactly where we need to be. If my ex hadn't left, I never would have met this man who loved my son like his own, who made me laugh every day, who showed up consistently without fail. The thought didn't make what my ex did okay. not even close, but it did make the pain feel purposeful somehow. We moved into the new house a month later, all four of us together. Both kids got their own rooms, which they were excited about for approximately one night before they started having sleepovers in each other's rooms instead. We hung my hammock in the backyard, in a spot with a good view of the sky. And sitting there together, our little family of four, I finally felt completely whole. Life was good for almost 7 years. 7 years of stability and happiness and the normal chaos of raising two kids. My son was 9 years old and barely remembered a time before his stepdad. The child support still came irregularly, sometimes months apart, but we'd stopped relying on it years ago. I'd honestly mostly forgotten about my ex, moved on completely. Then one evening, my phone rang, my old coworker from the hospital, the one who'd been with me through everything. Her voice was tense in a way that immediately put me on edge. "Maya," she said, "I need to warn you about something. Your ex-husband was here at the hospital last night." My stomach dropped. I hadn't heard his name in years, hadn't thought about him beyond the occasional child support deposit. He was a ghost, barely real anymore. She continued before I could respond. He wasn't a patient. He showed up in the emergency room around midnight, clearly intoxicated. He was asking for you specifically, telling the front desk he needed to talk to the nurse Maya. They told him you hadn't worked here in years, that they couldn't give out employee information anyway. He got aggressive, started raising his voice, insisting he knew you worked there and demanding your current information. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't running into each other by chance. He was hunting me. Security had to escort him out, she said. He was shouting about how you'd stolen his son, how you owed him, how he had rights. Maya, it was bad. I wanted you to know immediately in case he tries to find you another way. After I hung up, my hands were shaking so badly I had to put the phone down. I told my boyfriend everything, watching his face shift from confusion to concern to barely contained anger. The ghost of my past hadn't just reappeared. He'd come looking for me, deliberately, and that changed everything. Over the next few days, I pieced together what had happened to him. That woman he'd left me for had finally left him, apparently for someone with better prospects. Karma works in interesting ways sometimes. Around the same time, he'd lost his license for driving under the influence, ending his rideshare career immediately. Without income or transportation, his life spiraled fast. Then his mother died unexpectedly, leaving him a small inheritance. Not much, but enough to have given him a fresh start if he'd used it wisely. Instead, he drank it away within 3 months. By the end, he was essentially homeless, couch surfing with old friends who were getting tired of him, barely functioning. And somewhere in all that destruction, his brain had latched onto a dangerous idea. The family he'd abandoned almost a decade ago, the woman he'd walked away from without looking back, became his obsession. In his twisted logic, I was somehow responsible for his failures. If he could just get back what he'd thrown away, everything would be fixed. But he hadn't come to the hospital to make amends. He'd come drunk and aggressive, demanding information, making threats. This wasn't about wanting to be a father. This was about control, about blame, about a desperate man with nothing left to lose looking for someone to drag down with him. That night, the first message arrived. 2 a.m, just like that text he'd sent almost a decade ago when he'd abandoned me. This time it was a voice message. His words slurred and rambling. He missed his son. He'd made mistakes. He wanted to be involved now, wanted to make up for lost time. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say to someone who'd thrown us away and only wanted us back when he had nothing else left. The next night, another message, then another, each one progressively angrier as I continued to ignore him. By the end of the week, the tone had completely shifted from pathetic to aggressive. I'd stolen his son from him, he claimed. I'd poisoned his child against him. I'd ruined his life by taking him to court for child support all those years ago. The delusion was stunning. He'd ruined his own life through every single choice he'd made. But somehow, in his twisted version of reality, I was the villain. I'd forced him to abandon his pregnant wife. I'd made him drink away his inheritance. I'd caused every bad thing that had ever happened to him. I started saving everything, every message, every voicemail, every text. Created a file because I had a bad feeling about where this was heading. My boyfriend suggested we talk to a lawyer about a restraining order, but I wanted to wait and see if he'd just burn himself out first. Sometimes drunk people fixate on something and then move on when they don't get the reaction they want. I was hoping he was one of those. I was wrong. My elderly neighbor, the one who'd helped me when my son was a baby, called me one afternoon. She'd seen a man matching my ex's description walking around our street, just walking back and forth, looking at houses like he was searching for something specific. She hadn't approached him, but it had made her uncomfortable enough to let me know. My blood ran cold. He'd found where we lived. He was watching our house. This wasn't just drunk messaging anymore. This was stalking. This was dangerous. I called a lawyer that same day and started the process for a protective order. She explained it would take a few days to get before a judge, that I needed documented threats first. The messages would help, but we needed to establish a clear pattern of harassment and danger. More messages came over the next few days, each one darker than the last. Voicemails where his voice was slurred and furious, shouting about his rights as a father, how he'd been kept from his son for too long, how he was going to fix everything, make things right, whether I liked it or not. The threats weren't explicit enough to get him arrested immediately, but they were enough to terrify me. I kept the kids close, explained there was a situation we were handling. My son, 9 years old now, asked if it was about his biological father. He was old enough to understand more than I wanted him to. I told him the truth simply. His biological father was having serious problems and might try to contact us, but we were taking steps to keep everyone safe. The protective order was granted 5 days later. He had to stay at least 500 meters away from me, my son, our home, my work, and my son's school. Violating it would mean immediate arrest. But serving him the papers proved difficult. He was bouncing between addresses, staying with different people, impossible to pin down consistently. It took almost a week before the process server finally caught him at a bar. He'd been served, officially notified. I thought maybe that would be the end of it, that the legal order would scare him into backing off, make him realize this wasn't a game he could win. But desperate people with nothing left to lose don't make rational decisions. They make dangerous ones. And I was about to learn just how dangerous he'd become. Then the messages started. Late at night. Always when he was clearly drunk based on the typos and rambling nature. At first they were almost pathetic. He missed his son, he said. He'd made mistakes. He wanted to be involved now, wanted to make up for lost time. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say to someone who'd thrown us away and only wanted us back when he had nothing else left. When I didn't respond, the messages changed. They got angrier, more aggressive. I'd stolen his son from him, he claimed. I'd poisoned his child against him. I'd ruined his life by taking him to court for child support. The delusion was stunning. He'd ruined his own life through every choice he'd made, but somehow in his mind, I was the villain of his story. I saved every message, every voicemail. Started a file because I had a bad feeling about where this was heading. My boyfriend suggested we talk to a lawyer about a restraining order, but I wanted to wait and see if he'd just burn himself out. Sometimes drunk people get obsessed with something and then move on when they don't get the reaction they want. I was hoping he was one of those. I was wrong. One of my neighbors, the one who'd helped me when my son was a baby, called me one afternoon. She'd seen a man matching my ex's description walking around our neighborhood, just walking back and forth on our street, looking at houses. She hadn't approached him, but it had made her uncomfortable enough to let me know. My blood ran cold. He knew where we lived. He was watching our house. This wasn't just drunk messaging anymore. This was stalking. This was dangerous. I called the lawyer that same day and started the process of getting a protective order. She explained it would take a few days to get before a judge, that I needed documented threats first. The messages would help, but we needed to establish a pattern of harassment. More messages came over the next few days. Voicemails now too, his voice slurred and angry. He had rights as a father, he shouted into the phone. He'd been kept from his son for too long. He was going to fix everything, make things right whether I liked it or not. The threats weren't explicit enough to get him arrested immediately, but they were enough to terrify me. I kept the kids home from school for a few days, told them there was a situation we were handling, but they needed to stay close. My son asked if it was about his biological father. He was 9 now, old enough to understand more than I wanted him to. I told him the truth in the simplest terms I could. His biological father was having problems and might try to contact us, but we were taking steps to make sure everyone stayed safe. The protective order was granted on a Friday afternoon. He had to stay at least 500 meters away from me, my son, our home, my work, and my son's school. Violating it would mean immediate arrest. The process server tried to deliver it that same day but couldn't find him. He was bouncing between addresses, staying with different people, impossible to pin down. It took 3 more days before they finally served him at a bar where he was drinking. I thought maybe that would be the end of it, that the official legal order would scare him straight, make him realize this wasn't a game, that he'd back off and disappear again like he had before. I should have known better. Desperate people with nothing left to lose don't make rational decisions. They make dangerous ones. The protective order made things worse, not better. Like it had triggered something in him, made him angrier and more determined. The messages became more frequent, arriving at all hours. He'd call from different numbers that I'd have to block one by one. The voicemails were getting concerning enough that the lawyer said to save them all and report them to the police. He started leaving rambling audio messages, sometimes 5 or 6 in a row. They'd start out almost calm, talking about his son and his rights as a father. But by the end of each message, he'd be screaming about how I'd stolen his life, destroyed his family, taken everything from him. In his twisted version of reality, I was the one who'd abandoned him, not the other way around. The police took reports but said until he actually violated the order by coming near us, there wasn't much they could do. Words weren't enough for an arrest, apparently. They increased patrols in our neighborhood, which helped me feel slightly better, but I knew they couldn't be there all the time. We were essentially waiting for him to do something bad enough to justify intervention. I couldn't sleep anymore. Every sound outside made me jump. I'd check the locks multiple times a night, peek through the curtains to make sure no one was out there. My boyfriend started sleeping on the couch some nights so he could hear if anyone tried the doors. We were living in a constant state of alert, exhausted and terrified. The kids knew something was wrong. They'd catch us whispering, see how tense we both were. His daughter asked if we were okay, said we seemed scared. We tried to act normal around them, but kids aren't stupid. They can feel when the adults in their lives are stressed. I hated that he was affecting their peace too, invading their safe space even without being physically present. Then one night, around 2 a.m, someone started pounding on our door. Aggressive, violent pounding that woke up the entire house. The kids started crying. I grabbed my phone to call the police while my boyfriend went to the door, careful not to open it. He looked through the peephole and saw him, my ex, standing on our porch, clearly drunk, yelling about his son. We didn't open the door. My boyfriend shouted through it that the police were on their way and he needed to leave, that he was violating a protective order and would be arrested. But he just kept pounding, kept yelling, saying he had rights, that no piece of paper was going to keep him from his family, like he hadn't abandoned us a decade ago. The police took 11 minutes to arrive, longest 11 minutes of my life, listening to him rage outside our door while the kids sobbed in their rooms. But when the sirens got close, he ran, stumbled down the street and disappeared into the night before the officers could grab him. They searched the area, but he was gone. The officers took our statements, documented everything, photographed some damage he'd done to our door from the pounding. They said this was a clear violation and they'd arrest him on site. They increased patrols even more, promised to drive by every hour. But I knew that wasn't enough. He'd been here once, he'd come back. We reinforced the locks that same day, added security cameras front and back, started parking cars in the driveway instead of on the street so we'd hear if anyone approached the house, turned our home into a fortress, because that's what it took to feel even slightly safe. The lawyer filed additional charges based on the violation. This wasn't just harassment anymore, this was criminal. But they had to find him first, and he'd gone underground completely, not staying anywhere long enough to be located. The process server couldn't find him. The police couldn't find him. He was out there somewhere getting angrier, and we had no idea when he'd show up again. My son started having nightmares. He'd wake up crying, asking if the bad man was going to take him away. I'd hold him and promise that would never happen, that we'd keep him safe, but the words felt hollow. How could I promise that when I didn't feel safe myself? When my hands shook every time I heard an unexpected noise. His daughter started acting out at school, getting in fights, having tantrums. The stress was affecting her even though this wasn't directly her situation. She loved my son like a brother, loved our family, and seeing it threatened was breaking something in her. We got her into counseling, but it felt like putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. 2 weeks after the door incident, he tried a different approach. Started sending emails from new accounts as fast as I could block them. These were different, though. Less angry, more manipulative. He claimed he just wanted to meet his son, just wanted 5 minutes. He'd get help, get sober, do whatever it took. All he needed was a chance. But I remembered who he was 9 years ago, when he'd looked me in the eye and lied about being happy about the pregnancy. Remembered the 2 a.m. text message abandoning us. Remembered years of irregular child support and zero interest in his son's life. This wasn't about wanting to be a father. This was about control, about ego, about not being able to handle that I'd built a good life without him. The lawyer advised filing for complete termination of his parental rights. Given the abandonment, the protective order violation, the documented alcoholism, we had a strong case. But that process could take months, And in the meantime, we were just supposed to wait and hope he didn't escalate further. One Saturday afternoon, everything came to a head in the worst possible way. It was one of those perfect Saturday afternoons that make you forget bad things exist in the world. Sunny but not too hot. A light breeze that made sitting outside pleasant. My boyfriend and I were on the back porch watching the kids play in the yard. His daughter was pushing my son on the swing we'd installed last summer, both of them laughing. Everything felt normal and safe for the first time in weeks. I'd just gotten up to get us drinks from the kitchen when I heard my boyfriend say my name. Not loud, but sharp. Urgent. I turned around and my heart stopped. My ex was in our backyard. He'd climbed the fence, which wasn't high but still. He was standing there in wrinkled clothes, looking thinner than I remembered, swaying slightly. Drunk. Obviously drunk. The kids saw him and stopped playing. My son looked confused, didn't recognize him. His daughter moved closer to my son instinctively. Protective. I stepped in front of both of them, putting myself between them and him. My boyfriend was already moving, positioning himself between all of us and the threat. My ex started talking, words slurred but voice loud. He wasn't going to be kept away from his son anymore. No court order was going to stop him from seeing his own kid. He'd tried to do things the right way, but now he was done asking permission. He was taking his son home where he belonged. I told him to leave. Tried to keep my voice steady even though I was shaking. Told him he was violating the protective order, that the police would arrest him. But he just laughed. This bitter, angry sound. Said he didn't care about the police or the order or anything anymore. He'd lost everything already. What did he have left to lose? My boyfriend spoke then, calm but firm. Told him he needed to leave our property immediately. That he was scaring the children. That this wasn't the way to handle things. But my ex wasn't interested in reason. He started advancing toward us. Still talking about his rights. About taking his son. My boyfriend moved fully in front of me and the kids then. Told him one more time to leave. My ex responded by swinging at him. This wild, drunken punch that didn't have much force behind it but showed clear intent. That was the line. That was when everything escalated from scary to dangerous. What happened next was over in seconds but felt like it lasted forever. My boyfriend blocked the punch, grabbed my ex's arm, and in 3 efficient moves had him on the ground. It wasn't brutal or excessive. It was controlled, defensive. The kind of thing someone who knows what they're doing does to neutralize a threat without causing unnecessary harm. But my ex fought back, tried to get up, took a few solid hits before he stayed down. I already had my phone out, was dialing 911 as my boyfriend held him down. The kids were crying, terrified. I got them inside the house, locked the door, and stayed on the phone with the dispatcher while my boyfriend kept my ex pinned in the yard. He was bleeding from his nose, still trying to fight even though he had no chance, screaming about injustice and his son. The police arrived in under 5 minutes. This time there was no escape. They found him in our yard, clearly intoxicated, violating a protective order, having assaulted someone on their own property. They cuffed him while he yelled, dragged him away, still shouting threats and accusations. One officer stayed behind to take our statements while the other took him to jail. My boyfriend had a split lip and bruised knuckles. Nothing serious, but seeing him hurt because of my past, because of my ex's instability, made me feel sick with guilt. He insisted he was fine, said he'd do it again without hesitation to protect us. The officer who'd stayed took photos of his injuries, documented everything. Self-defense was obvious, he said. Clear-cut case. We gave detailed statements about everything. The months of harassment, the protective order violation at the door, today's invasion. I showed him the file of saved messages and voicemails, weeks' worth of evidence. The officer said this was more than enough to press serious charges. My ex wasn't getting out of this one with just a warning. After the police left, I held my son while he cried. He was asking questions I didn't know how to answer. Why did that man want to take him? Why was he so angry? Was he going to come back? I told him the truth as gently as I could. That man was his biological father, but he was sick and making bad choices. That he couldn't hurt us anymore because the police wouldn't let him. That he was safe here with us. His daughter was shaken up too. She kept asking if everyone was okay, if the man was gone for good. My boyfriend held her and promised her that everything would be fine now, that the bad part was over. I hoped desperately he was right. That night, neither kid would sleep in their own rooms. They both ended up in our bed, sandwiched between us, needing the reassurance of our presence. I lay there in the dark, listening to them breathe, feeling my boyfriend's steady presence on the other side, and felt the adrenaline finally wearing off. We'd survived. We were all okay. But the fact that it had come to this, that my ex had forced this confrontation, made me angrier than I'd ever been. The next morning, still exhausted and running on no sleep, I called the lawyer, told her everything that had happened. She said to come in immediately, that we had more than enough now to push for the harshest possible consequences. Not just termination of parental rights, but serious criminal charges that would keep him away from us permanently. For the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe this nightmare was actually ending. My ex spent that first night in jail, and from what I heard through the system, he didn't go quietly. He ranted at the officers processing him, claimed he was the victim, that he'd been set up by his vengeful ex-wife who'd turned his own son against him. The officers documented all of it, every word adding to the pile of evidence that he was unstable and dangerous. Monday morning, I went to the police station to give a formal statement and press charges. The detective handling the case was thorough, asking detailed questions about every incident going back months. I showed him my complete file of saved messages, voicemails, emails, everything. He looked increasingly disturbed as he went through it all, making notes about patterns of escalation and clear threats. My boyfriend came separately to give his statement about the assault. He brought photos of his injuries, his own account of what happened. The detective assured him it was textbook self-defense and that there was zero question about who the aggressor was. My ex had trespassed, violated a protective order, and physically attacked someone protecting children. This wasn't going to end well for him. The charges stacked up quickly. Violation of a protective order, criminal trespass, assault, attempted kidnapping based on his stated intent to take my son. Each one was serious on its own. Together, they painted a picture of someone who'd completely lost control and posed a genuine danger. His arraignment was set for Wednesday. I attended, sitting in the back of the courtroom with the lawyer who'd been helping me through everything. He looked terrible, wearing jail clothes, unshaven, shaking slightly. The judge read the charges, and his face went pale. When asked how he pled, he started to argue, tried to explain his side. His public defender literally put a hand on his arm to stop him, and entered a plea of not guilty. Bail was set high, higher than he could possibly pay. The prosecutor argued convincingly that he was a flight risk and danger to others. The judge agreed, citing the escalating pattern of behavior and violation of previous court orders. He'd stay in jail until trial. I felt relief wash over me so intensely I almost cried right there in the courtroom. Walking out, the prosecutor stopped me. She wanted to discuss the case, explain what would happen next. We'd go to trial within 2 months, most likely. Given the evidence and his behavior, she was confident about a conviction. She asked if I'd considered filing for termination of his parental rights in family court simultaneously. I told her my lawyer was already preparing that petition. The family court hearing happened first, about 3 weeks later. My lawyer presented our case methodically. 9 years of abandonment with minimal contact, irregular child support payments, the recent harassment and violence, my ex's documented alcoholism and instability. The judge listened to everything, reviewed the extensive evidence, and made notes. My ex's lawyer tried to argue that he'd been prevented from having a relationship with his son, that I'd poisoned the child against him. My lawyer calmly pointed out that he'd initiated the abandonment, had blocked all contact, had shown zero interest in his son's life until his own fell apart, that his recent actions weren't those of someone who genuinely wanted to be a father, but rather someone who wanted control and was using his son as a weapon. When asked if he wanted to make a statement, my ex stood up and started rambling about how much he loved his son, how he'd made mistakes but deserved a chance to make it right. But his words were empty, clearly rehearsed by his lawyer. The judge let him finish, then asked one simple question. Can you name one thing about your son? His interests, his friends, his favorite anything? The silence was deafening. He didn't know, couldn't answer, had no idea who his 9-year-old son actually was because he'd never bothered to find out. The judge's expression hardened. That told her everything she needed to know about his true motivations. The ruling came down the next day. Termination of all parental rights granted, effective immediately. He had no claim to my son anymore, no right to visitation, no legal connection whatsoever. The judge noted that my son was old enough now that his wishes mattered, and he'd made it clear through the guardian ad litem that he wanted no contact with his biological father. The judge agreed that was in his best interest. Additionally, the child support was actually increased as a form of financial consequence for the abandonment and attempted violence. He'd pay more than before, and it would be garnished directly from any income he earned. He couldn't dodge it anymore. Every cent would go into an account for my son's future, college, or whatever he needed. The criminal trial happened a month later. I had to testify, recount everything that happened that day in our backyard. It was hard, bringing it all back up, but necessary. My boyfriend testified too, calm and clear about the sequence of events. The kids didn't have to testify, thank God, but their statements to the police were entered as evidence. The prosecution presented them months of messages and voicemails, played some of the most disturbing ones in court. The jury looked increasingly uncomfortable as they listened to him spiral from pathetic to aggressive to outright threatening. His lawyer tried to paint him as a desperate father kept from his child, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours, guilty on all counts. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. The prosecutor told me to prepare a victim impact statement if I wanted to, that it might influence the sentence. I spent a week writing it, trying to articulate the fear and disruption and trauma he'd caused. At sentencing, I read my statement aloud, talked about the sleepless nights, the children's nightmares, the feeling of being hunted in my own home. The judge listened intently, then delivered the sentence. 1 year in jail, followed by 5 years probation. Permanent restraining order with no possibility of contact until my son turned 18 and could make his own choice about whether to have a relationship. When they led him away, he looked back at me once. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, nothing. He was just a stranger now who'd briefly ruined my peace but couldn't touch my life anymore. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt lighter than I had in months. The weeks following the sentencing felt like slowly exhaling after holding my breath for months. The constant fear that had been sitting on my chest started to lift. I could sleep through the night again. The kids stopped having nightmares. We dismantled some of the extra security measures we'd put up, though we kept the cameras. Better safe than sorry. Life started returning to normal, or as normal as it could be after everything. My son went back to being a regular 9-year-old, playing with friends and complaining about homework. His daughter stopped acting out at school, her grades improved. The therapy was helping both of them process what had happened. Kids are resilient in ways that constantly amazed me. Work became easier too. I wasn't constantly distracted, checking my phone for threats, jumping at unexpected sounds. My coworkers noticed the change in me, commented that I seemed more relaxed. My old coworker from the hospital, who'd been checking on me throughout everything, took me out for coffee to celebrate that it was finally over. She'd been my rock through so much, and I made sure she knew how grateful I was. My elderly neighbor, the one who'd helped me when my son was a baby and had warned me when she spotted my ex in the neighborhood, brought over a cake. She was getting older now, moved slower, but her kindness hadn't diminished at all. We sat on my porch eating cake and drinking tea while the kids played in the yard. She told me she was proud of how strong I'd been. Coming from her, someone who'd survived her own share of hardships, it meant everything. About a month after sentencing, my boyfriend started acting strange. Not bad strange, just different. He'd get this look on his face sometimes when he thought I wasn't watching, like he was working through something in his mind. He'd start to say something, then stop. I figured he was processing everything we'd been through, giving him space to do that. One evening in early fall, after the kids had gone to bed, he asked me to come sit with him in the hammock. It had become our spot, the place where we had our best conversations. The night was cool enough that we needed a blanket, and I curled up against him, watching stars appear as the sky darkened. He was quiet for a while, just holding me. Then he started talking about the past year, about how scared he'd been during all of it. Not for himself, he clarified, but for me and the kids. About how seeing my ex in our yard that day had triggered something primal in him, this overwhelming need to protect his family. His family. The way he said it made my heart skip. He talked about how proud he was of me, of how I'd handled everything with such strength and grace, how I'd protected my son while still building a good life, how I'd faced down my past when it came back threatening everything. He said he'd known pretty early on that I was special, but watching me through all this had made him certain. Then he shifted, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a small box. My breath caught. He opened it to show me a simple ring. Nothing flashy, but beautiful. He said he'd bought it months ago, before everything with my ex had escalated, had been waiting for the right moment, but every time he'd thought about proposing, something else would happen, and it didn't feel right to add more pressure. But now, he said, now felt perfect. We'd survived the worst together. We'd proven we were a team, that we'd protect each other and our kids no matter what. He wanted to make it official, wanted us to be a real family in every sense. Would I marry him? I was crying before I could even answer. Happy tears, the kind I hadn't cried in years. I said yes immediately, multiple times, while he laughed and slid the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. The kids must have been listening from inside, because suddenly they were both running out in their pajamas, jumping around excitedly. He'd asked them first, he admitted. Made sure they were okay with it before asking me. The kids tackled us in the hammock, all four of us tangled together laughing. His daughter asked if this meant we'd all have the same last name. My son asked if he could call him Dad instead of his first name. My boyfriend, my fiancé now, said yes to both with tears in his eyes. We stayed out there for hours, planning and dreaming and being happy in a way that felt earned. The date we picked was 6 months out, giving us time to plan, but not so long we'd drive ourselves crazy with details. We decided on something small in our backyard, just close friends and family. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, just people who mattered celebrating with us. I called my parents the next day to tell them. My mom cried, said she was so happy I'd found someone who loved me and my son the way I deserved. My dad gruffly said he approved, which was high praise from him. They promised to come help with whatever we needed for the wedding. Planning the wedding became this joyful project that the whole family participated in. The kids had opinions on everything from decorations to what food we should serve. We let them be as involved as they wanted, making it feel like their day too. Because in a way it was. We weren't just joining two people. We were officially becoming a family of 4. At night, when the kids were asleep and we were alone, we'd talk about the future. About maybe buying a bigger house someday. About whether we wanted more kids, deciding probably not. That 4 was our perfect number. About growing old together, watching our kids grow up, eventually having grandchildren, plans that felt real and possible and not at all scary. I still had my notebook, though I rarely wrote in it anymore. But the night we set the wedding date, I added a new entry. I wrote about how sometimes life takes you through hell to get you to exactly where you need to be. About how the worst thing that ever happened to me had somehow led to the best thing. About how grateful I was for this second chance at happiness, at family, at love that actually stayed. The wedding day arrived on a perfect Saturday in spring. We'd kept everything simple like we planned, setting up chairs in our backyard, stringing lights through the trees, putting flowers everywhere the kids had helped pick out. My elderly neighbor had insisted on making the cake, saying it was her gift to us. My old coworker had arranged all the flowers herself, refusing to let me pay for them. My parents arrived 2 days early to help with final preparations. My mom fussed over details while my dad built an arch out of wood and vines for us to stand under. His daughter designed the programs on our computer and printed them at school. My son appointed himself in charge of making sure all the chairs were perfectly straight, a job he took very seriously. The morning of the wedding, I woke up with both kids in my bed again, though for happy reasons this time. They were too excited to sleep. We made pancakes together, our Saturday morning tradition, and ate breakfast still in our pajamas. In a few hours, everything would change officially, but this moment felt important. One last morning as our almost family before we became completely official. Getting ready was chaotic in the best way. His daughter wanted to do my makeup, insisted she knew how even though she was only 11. I let her, and honestly, she did a pretty good job. My son kept asking if it was time yet every 5 minutes. My mom helped me into my dress, a simple cream-colored thing I'd found at a department store. Nothing expensive or elaborate, just something that made me feel pretty. Looking in the mirror, I thought about the woman I'd been 10 years ago. Pregnant and abandoned, terrified and alone. If I could have told her then where she'd end up, I don't think she would have believed me, but we'd made it. We'd survived and built something beautiful from the ruins. The ceremony was short and sweet, just like we'd wanted. Both kids stood up with us, holding rings, beaming with pride. My son handed over my ring when it was time, this little boy who'd only ever known one father despite having 2 biologically. When we exchanged vows, we included promises to the kids too. Promises to love and protect and support each other, all 4 of us together. The moment my fiancé became my husband felt both monumental and completely natural. Like we'd been married already in all the ways that mattered, and this was just making it official. We kissed while everyone cheered, and I heard both kids shout, "Yes!" making everyone laugh. During the reception, which was really just a backyard party with our favorite people, my son came up to me. He looked serious, like he had something important to say. He told me he was glad his biological father wasn't there, that his real dad was the one who'd just married me, the one who'd always been there, who'd protected us, who loved him. I hugged him tight, crying again, and told him I felt the same way. Later that evening, after most guests had left and it was just close family cleaning up, I went inside to change my last name on everything. My work badge, my email, my social media, all of it. My new name, chosen not given to me by someone who'd leave. I stared at my updated profile for a long time, feeling the weight and joy of what it represented. That night, lying in bed next to my husband while the kids slept peacefully in their rooms, I thought about that cheap pendant I'd ripped off and thrown away a decade ago. How angry I'd been, how betrayed, how certain my life was over. I was grateful now that I'd had the courage to throw it away, to let go of something that had only ever been a symbol of broken promises. I got up quietly and found my old notebook, the one I'd been writing in since I was newly pregnant and terrified. I flipped through years of entries, promises to my unborn son, updates on our life, fears, and hopes and dreams. The pages documented a journey I'd never wanted to take but couldn't regret now because of where it had led. I wrote one final entry, dated it with my wedding day and new last name. I wrote about how sometimes the people who are supposed to love us will fail us spectacularly, about how that failure, as much as it hurts, doesn't define us or limit what we can become. I wrote about rebuilding from absolute zero and discovering you're stronger than you ever knew you could be. I wrote about my son, now 10 years old, who'd never known instability despite everything because I'd fought to give him security. About my stepdaughter who'd welcomed us into her family as easily as if we'd always belonged there. About my husband who'd loved me and my son as a package deal, never making us feel like a burden. Most importantly, I wrote about myself. About the frightened pregnant woman who'd been abandoned and the strong mother who'd persevered. About how I'd built a life I was proud of, raised a son who was kind and loved, found a partner who actually deserved the title. About how no one could take any of it away from me because I'd earned every single piece of it through sheer determination. I closed the notebook and put it in a drawer. Someday, maybe when my son was older, I'd let him read it if he wanted. Let him see the whole journey, understand how much he'd been wanted and loved and fought for even before he was born. But for now, it was just mine, a record of survival and strength. Going back to bed, I looked at my husband sleeping peacefully, thought about my kids safe in their rooms, and felt completely content. We'd been through hell and come out the other side as a family. Whatever challenges came next, we'd face them together. And that made all the difference. 10 years ago, I'd lost everything I thought I wanted and gained something infinitely better. A real family, built on choice and commitment rather than obligation. A love that showed up consistently, not just when it was convenient. A life I'd constructed myself, piece by piece, that no one could ever take away. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing. Sometimes being abandoned leads you to exactly where you were meant to be all along. I couldn't change my past. Wouldn't want to even if I could because it made me who I was. But I could control my future. And that future looked bright. My son had asked me once, years ago when he was little, why his biological father had left. I'd told him some people don't know how to stay. But we know how to stay, I'd said. You and me were a team. Now that team had grown to 4, and it was stronger than ever. We knew how to stay. We knew how to love. We knew how to build something that lasted. And nobody was ever taking that away from us.